Hello, my name is Elliot Williams, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my interview of Captain Benjamin Williams of the Tucson Fire Department and how his leader characteristics tie into what we've been learning in our Management 420 class. We're going to start off by talking about Captain Williams' role on the fire department before talking about his greatest career achievement, as well as his greatest career challenge, an emotional dilemma that put his integrity at stake. Very interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Next, we'll talk about Captain Williams' leadership style before talking about Tucson Fire Department's mission, vision, and values, and whether or not an entrepreneurial mindset is important for being a captain. Next, we'll talk about the application of Captain Williams' leadership theory before comparing him to Chief Alan Brunaccini, who is a well-renowned fire chief over the United States and a well-respected member of that industry. Next, we'll talk about lessons we can learn from Captain Williams' leadership experience before wrapping it all up. So first off, who is Benjamin Williams? Benjamin Williams is a captain on the Tucson Fire Department. He's been serving there for 23 years, 19 of which he has been as a captain. Part of his duties as captain include leading a crew in their response to emergencies, as well as local education about emergency prevention. And he also personally makes sure that he develops his crew as leaders and their characters as well. TFD is a paramilitary organization, which means there's a lot of structure, but Captain Williams really likes a more relationship-oriented approach to leadership, meaning he gets multiple opportunities to combine different leadership styles in his line of work. His greatest career achievement, he told me, was when he realized he had crossed the threshold from learning and following to leading and executing the mission. He told me he experienced a lot less stress and that decisions came more naturally and quickly to him, allowing him to enable his crew to execute the mission in a more efficient and safe manner. A couple people of his managers poured into him during this time to make that transition possible. But in particular, Captain Williams told me about the impact of Chief Lopez on his life. Chief Lopez had the opportunity to correct Captain Williams a couple times when he was making leadership mistakes. And he said it wasn't fun at the time, but now when he's faced with a big leadership choice, that he takes a step back and thinks about what Chief Lopez would do in that situation. So obviously this person had a great impact on getting Captain Williams to the point where he felt proficient in his line of work. This is his rankings of the servant leadership characteristics. We can see that he personally places high importance on healing, commitment to the growth of people, and interest in building community. And this makes sense because he is a public servant. His duty is to the people of Tucson first, but he also wants to make sure his crew is prospering well. And if they're not, he needs to find a solution to that and heal that situation so that they can work together well as a team and therefore serve the city of Tucson better. Captain Williams told me about a time when he was faced with an ethical dilemma. His engineer or truck driver hit the side view mirror of a car in a low-income area of town. And he had to decide whether or not to write his engineer up or try to sweep it under the rug and hope nothing would happen. He had to consider his role in the fire department and his duty to write the engineer up in that situation, as well as his commitment to the citizen of Tucson. Another thing he had to consider was his integrity and what precedence it would set with the rest of his crew. There were two other people with him at that time, and Captain Williams knew eventually word would get around, and if he chose to sweep that situation under the rug, there would be situations in the future where people weren't sure whether or not the line would be, whether or not Captain Williams would enforce the standard. And he didn't want that to be a possibility, so we decided to resolve the issue by writing a report about the engineer. It wouldn't hurt his reputation in the long run, and he wanted to make it right for the person whose car they hit while maintaining his integrity. During this crisis, we can see that Captain Williams ranked all the leadership characteristics very high, which I was surprised at first, but upon further thought, it kind of makes sense because when you're faced with a hard decision, you really want to consider all those elements. Captain Williams told me an especially influential characteristic in this circumstance was that of empathy. He needed to put himself in the shoes of the person whose car they hit, and whether or not they would be able to get retribution for this, being in a low-income area of town. And he had a duty to them first before his crewmates. During this situation, Captain Williams demonstrated 3 separate power bases: personal legitimate, personal expert, and positional legitimate. And this is basically referring to Captain Williams's authority and his duty to discipline his engineer. And then personal expert, this is just talking about his experience and his knowledge that writing up his engineer wouldn't result in any long-term effect to his reputation, because it would go away after a year if he didn't have any other issues in that area. And then we have personal referent power base. He had to consider the opinions of his crew members of him. They respected him for being a man of integrity, and he didn't want any bad decisions he made in that situation to impact that respect for his integrity. Next, I asked him about Tucson Fire Department's mission, vision, and entrepreneurial outlook. He told me their mission statement was to protect the lives and property of the citizens of Tucson from hazards through prevention, education, and active intervention. That's a nice, detailed mission statement. Their vision statement is to prevent, respond, and serve anytime, anywhere. But when I asked him about Tucson Fire Department's values, he told me there weren't any explicitly stated values, but prevention seemed to be a theme of that organization. He told me that in training, he was told that there was no honor in putting out a fire that could have been prevented in the first place. And throughout our interview, it seemed prevention was also a common theme, especially when talking about Captain Williams's initiative to cut down on as many drug overdoses as possible by providing their families Narcan so they could prevent those situations from happening again. Next, we talked about how important having an entrepreneurial mindset is as a captain. Again, Captain Williams ranked most of these very high. One aspect that surprised me was his ranking of risk propensity. It was kind of low compared to the rest, which is surprising because many people think of firefighters as having a very high risk associated with their job. And Captain Williams told me that most people tell him, I would never run into a burning building. And he responds like, of course not. You haven't had the equipment provided to you to make that a safer option, or the training that would help you know what to do in that situation. So that kind of makes a little bit more sense. They risk little to save little and risk a lot to save a lot. But otherwise, entrepreneurial self-efficacy, he told me, was very important, because as a leader, you need to take responsibility for your actions and the outcomes that are associated with your choices. After the interview and upon further research, I can conclude that Captain Williams ascribes to the House path goal contingency theory of leadership, which makes sense because he has a strong preference for relationship-oriented styles of leadership, but at the same time, the structure of his work environment doesn't always make that possible. He wants to provide clear direction on goals, tasks, and performance standards. And while he will try to implement a coaching style of leadership first, he may have to revert to a task-oriented approach, such as transactional or disciplinary approaches of leadership. It depends on the situation, thus being in the contingency theory category. At the end of the day, Captain Williams's main focus is to the people of Tucson and for his crew and their professional development. And this is really similar to that of Chief Brunaccini. Chief Brunaccini is a well-renowned fire chief across the United States. He's since passed, but he's written many leadership books about how to lead in the fire department industry. And he also ascribes to a path goal leadership. He was really good at making sure his subordinates were empowered to try out their own new ideas so that they could also develop as leaders. A couple strengths of this leadership style is that it fosters commitment, but a potential drawback is it takes a lot of time to build rapport with your subordinates. And no matter what you do to clear the way, to clear the path towards the goal and defining the goal, it's still contingent on whether or not the employee will actually take steps to reach that goal. So that could be a potential drawback. A couple lessons I took away from this is that integrity is priceless. People don't follow leaders based on what they say, but what they do when they think nobody's looking. Also, servant leadership demonstrates care for the crew. Putting the crew first paves the way for commitment to the mission, and this commitment motivates them to do a better job, which is therefore better for their customer, which is the people of Tucson. And finally, humility keeps you sharp. Captain Williams told me, the more you learn, the more you realize you rely on your crew and that you can't do everything on yourself. And he realizes that there is a lot more to just his decisions. There's a lot more that he needs help with. And that's why he leans on his crew and tries to develop them as the future leaders that they will eventually be. At the end of the day, this was a really great interview. I chose to interview him because he's my father, and I've personally been able to see his leadership progression. And I know the dynamic work environment he has requires a mix and match of a lot of different leadership styles. The interview process went really well. I had to rephrase a couple of questions, and I actually gave him examples of external and internal locuses of control and what it means to have self-efficacy. The whole process putting together the presentation went well as well. I stuck to the timeline presented in class. One drawback was I misunderstood a couple questions and I had to call him again to re-clarify the answers. But at the end of the day, it was a great experience interviewing him, and I learned a lot of invaluable knowledge that I believe will serve me and you all as well in the future. Thank you.